Now I'd like to welcome Professor David Kaldewey. He's going to have a keynote on diversity strategies at universities. He is the director at the Forum Internationale Wissenschaft at the Science Studies Department at the University of Bonn. And we will have time for questions after his presentation. So if you have any questions or comments, please write them into the chat, and I'm going to pass them on to Dr. Kaldewey. The stage is yours. Thank you very much and good morning. I am very happy to be here, and I'm trying to share my screen now.
Sie können mich sehen?
Can you see me?
Sie sehen die Folien?
And can you see my slides?
Dann lege ich los.
Okay, then let's get started.
Ich habe meinen Vortrag in 2 Teile geteilt. Thema auch
I've divided my presentation in 2 parts. We're going to talk about diversity. I'm going to differentiate between diversity discourse, diversity practices, and diversity strategies. And the idea is to take a look at this career of diversity and make it a bit more transparent. In the second part, that's going to be the shorter part leading to a discussion, I will ask the question what internationalization is all about. And this is what Mr. Six has already touched upon. We're going to talk about the interplay between internationalization and diversity. So let's start with the first part, diversity on the career of a global imperative. In April 2022, the contra bass player and podcaster Delaney Harris tweeted this screenshot of the Eastman School of Music. The post got more than 70,000 likes. This is a filler text that was not yet replaced by the actual statement. But with this involuntary filler text, a huge audience was reached, and this audience obviously immediately got the message. When we talk about diversity, we can write just anything. Of course, the organizer of this website did not mean to say that, but suddenly the aware audience puts meaning to this text. Diversity, that's what we learn, is something valuable. Diversity is something we can write nice quotes about. But what exactly it is, well, that does not play an important role. You commit to diversity without even knowing what exactly that means. But we should not prematurely conclude that diversity is just a hype or meaningless term. Rather, the sociological challenge is to explain why this term has been established that successfully for decades, even though, depending on the context, this term means different things, and some critics say that it can mean anything. It's a paradox that diversity, on the one hand, stands for a global imperative that nobody can evade, and on the other hand, it also may mean different things. Niklas Luhmann distinguished between social structure and semantics. When we talk about diversity, first of all, we think about real differences, but diversity as a semantic, or as Luhmann would say, cultivated semantics, is an important moment of self-description for modern societies. Other authors call it a normative meta-narrative or a moment of social imaginary of our present-day society. If we look at it like that, it is diversity is something that creates the identity of our epoch. It is also a filler for a couple of assumptions as to how people understand and design collective experiences. In his overview on this topic, anthropologist and director of the Max Planck Institute, Steven Vertovec, points out that the discursive diversity should not be confused with real socio-structural and cultural processes. So we have two parallel transformation processes that we have to distinguish. First of all, diversification of social structure. On the other hand, the emergence of diversity as a new semantics, or in other words, diversity is real and imagined at the same time. The semantics, the way we talk about diversity, the idea of what identity is, does not just reflect the social structure, the differences that we find out there in the world, but rather it is in a dialectic relationship to this reality. We could imagine, for instance, that the discourse on diversity is necessary in order to cope with the effects of the actual differences. These introductory words have made clear that diversity is not so easy to define. Therefore, first of all, we have to break down what we are researching on when we talk about diversity. Against this backdrop, I suggest a simple heuristic system. We have three different levels of diversity that we can differentiate. This is not only of relevance in theory, but it will also help those working on diversity in practice, because it makes it easier to understand this phenomenon. On the first level, we're talking about diversity discourses. These are condensed networks of terms that are associated with diversity, categories, ideals, and ideologies. Of course, we can also refer to terms like heterogeneity, multiculturalism, inclusion, and so on. Then we have level number two. These are the diversity practices that we have in everyday life. We could refer to this as doing diversity, practical action that is embedded in implied knowledge. On the third level, we have diversity strategies, which are made out of diverse discourses as well as diversity practices, mission statements, diversity policies, for instance. So the implied knowledge is codified as explicit knowledge, and structures are created, task forces or staff organization or other organizational units are established, and people are employed, and they are in charge of implementing and further developing these strategies. Now I'd like to give you some examples and some historical input. Let's get started. Let's start with diversity discourses. When we talk about diversity, what do we mean? It makes sense not to start with the public discourse, but let's start with the question what people associate with this term. In the United States, a lot of research has been done on this question. The American Mosaic Project took place between 2003 and 2014. It is about everyday perceptions and associations with the term diversity. This was carried out at universities. A lot of tension became obvious. On the one hand, it was found that Americans are quite enthusiastic when they talk about diversity. On the other hand, most of the respondents, despite of this positive attitude, had difficulties explaining what exactly was the positive thing about diversity. When you ask them about their experience, they came up with stories of encounters with racially others. And Douglas Hartman, one of the principal investigators of this study, he refers to a racialized diversity discourse. It is deeply structured and informed by the language and experiences with race. This example of this close association of diversity and race shows how difficult it is to talk about a global diversity discourse, because of course what happens or what is associated with diversity depends on the context. In Germany, for instance, the US-American category of race does not really help us. In Germany, the concept of migration background is more important, and Just because the category of race doesn't play a role, that does not mean that we do not have racism. Anti-discrimination is seen by many as one of the key tasks of diversity management. This does not change the fact that when we talk about diversity in Germany, in everyday life, this has nothing to do with race, but rather with gender. However, we cannot say that the discourse in the United States is only limited to race and the discourse in Germany is only limited to gender. Rather, this global diversity imperative is also combines all of these different kinds of diversity. Of course, it has always been tried to kind of structure or sort these different diversity categories. Here you can see the 4 layers of diversity. Many of you will probably have already seen this in previous presentations, so I will be brief about this. All I want to show is that we have a broad consensus that the term diversity is not limited to individual categories, but that there is a diversity of different diversity categories. But this is just a theory. In practice, where the context matters, there will always be some categories that are more important than others. Certain aspects of diversity will be appreciated more than others or will be getting more attention than others. And this brings us to the second level, the diversity practices. In practice, of course, we have always been handling diversity. We have promoted and appreciated or neglected diversity, even if there was no widespread public debate going on. Therefore, I would suggest that the term of diversity practices should not be understood in a normative way, but we should be open in using it. We should use it for any type of practical handling of diversity, because even if there are problems with racism or sexism, this still is diversity practice. We also have to point out that there are many positive ways of dealing with diversity, and this already happened before we had strategies or programs. Yesterday's conference, when we heard about the students' experiences in their testimonials, these practices became visible. The students' testimonials also showed us that there is a desire to have more reliable strategies and practices. Another example, when we talk about the difference between theory and practice, comes from a discussion with one of my colleagues. She worked a lot at universities in Ghana, and she monitored and observed diversity practices. In her research, she says that at the universities where she did her research, compared to universities in the West, there are hardly any diversity offices with their own resources and personnel. However, in teaching, there were some established ways of dealing with diversity, which imply that the diversity exists and is being appreciated.
So that seminars are not put at times where certain students cannot attend the lectures. That brings me to the diversity strategies and diversity management. When talking about formal programs, then most people think of diversity management. However, the career of the diversity term is not identical, but cannot be totally distinguished from diversity management, which was developed in the 1980s in the US as an instrument for personnel and organizational development, which was a reaction showing how to deal with the workforce. This is the Workforce 2000 report from 1987, and it is considered a founding program. So this has become a standard for private organizations, but also in public organizations and schools. And in different sectors, it took ground and also spread at global level. It seems to be an American context, but at global level, you will also find this in very diverse cultural contexts, and it has become a universal diversity imperative, and no one can withdraw from it. No institution, no organization, and not even the DAAD. The private benefit of diversity management differs from context to context. In companies, literature talks about a business case for diversity. So the promotion of diversity will have a benefit on the profit of a company. However, if we do not only take a look at the benefits of diversity management in this context, but also in the educational context, the result should be different. So we are not talking about diversity management in the higher education context, but rather about diversity strategies. So if we ask for diversity strategies in the higher education context, most people would not think of a business case, but they would talk about social justice. And I would like to refer to a historical background and talk about the United States of the 1970s, 1978 to be precise. The Supreme Court for the first time dealt with the question whether affirmative action is a kind of discrimination against white students. Tucker versus Regents of the University of California was the case, and there were 6 different opinions because there were lots of debates about this case, and this has become part of the history of higher education. There was a white student, Mr. Bucker, and he was rejected twice by the University of California, and he filed a case against the University of California because he felt discriminated against black student. Judge Louis Powell said that the admission system was not in line with the Constitution. However, and that is decisive, it is legitimate for universities to take the ethnicity of an applicant into consideration. As a reason, Powell presents that diversity of the student body is in the interest of the university and all other students, because everyone, even the white students, can benefit from the contact and the opinions of black students. So the history of affirmative action and diversity has not come to an end in this judgment. In other states of the United States and other opinions of the Supreme Court have continued to deal with this. In the USA, at least, there is an intertwining context between the opinions of judges and the Constitution. And the question is, why is diversity so disputed? The question is it about social justice or is it about plurality? The second point is diversity is not related to justice, but it is related to a higher good in which everyone can benefit from diversity and the plurality of students, and that is the academic pendant of the business case. So this is the benefit at educational level. So today we would say diversity would promote excellence. And now we go back to today's situation. I have a study here from the year 2018, 40 years after the first opinion of the Supreme Case, and it analyzes diversity today. 9 million papers and of 6 million scientists have been analyzed, and it shows the diversity of the co-authors on the impact of a paper. Impact means how often is it quoted. The more diverse, the better. Diverse teams create more influential and possibly also more innovative research. And this was analyzed for ethnicity, discipline, institutional affiliation, and academic field. And the
lässt sich
great
für den Faktor
effect of this
Ethnizität
paper
ausmachen. Das ist
can
eine
be
super
seen in
Story,
ethnicity.
genau
This
die
is
Art von
a
Evidenz,
super
die man
story,
sich in der
and this is
Diversity
exactly
Community gerne
what
anhört, weil es im Prinzip
people
der
like to hear
wissenschaftliche
in
Beweis dafür ist, dass
diversity research,
Diversität,
because
insbesondere
this
ethnische
shows that
Diversität, einen
ethnic
positiven
diversity
Effekt, einen Nutzen hat.
particularly has a
Ich bringe
positive
das Beispiel
effect
hier aber
and a
nicht nur, weil das
benefit.
eine schöne
I'm not
Erfolgsmeldung ist,
showing
sondern weil
this
man auf den
example
zweiten
because
Blick noch
it is
etwas
a great
anderes sehen kann. Die
success
Frage
story,
ist
but we
nämlich,
can also see
wie wird
something
eigentlich
different.
in dieser Art von
How
Forschung Ethnic
can this
Diversity
kind of research
operationalisiert? Wie messen die
show
Autoren eigentlich, ob ein
ethnicity, and how
Autorenteam
is it
ethnisch divers
operationalized?
zusammengesetzt ist?
How is it measured?
Sie benutzen
How
dazu
is it
einen
classified?
sogenannten
They
Name
use
Ethnicity
a name
Classifier, also einen
ethnicity
Algorithmus, der die
classifier that is
Namen
an
der
algorithm
Autorinnen, der
that
untersuchten
takes the
Paper mit
names
einer
of the
Zuverlässigkeit von
authors
80%
and
einer
with
von 13 ethnischen Gruppen bzw.
reliability
Weltregionen
of
zuordnet.
80%, they
Hier kann man
are
natürlich
allocated
fragen,
to one of
was
the
sagt denn
ethnic groups
eigentlich
of
der
the world.
Name
So
einer
what does the
Autorin
name
über deren
of an author
Ethnizität?
say
Könnte man nicht
about
genauso
her
argumentieren,
or his
dass hier
ethnicity? We might
Internationalität
say,
oder
well,
internationaler Hintergrund gemessen
internationalization
wird? Mit
or
anderen
the
Worten,
international background
der
is measured.
Effekt,
So the
der in diesem
effect
Paper gemessen wird,
that is
hätte
measured
man
in this
früher
paper,
wahrscheinlich als der
well,
Internationalisierung
would
zugeschrieben.
have been
Man hätte darin
allocated
den
to
Beweis gesehen, dass
internationalization in the
international
past.
zusammengesetzte Teams
So
bessere Forschung
we would
produzieren
have
als
said
nur
in the
national
past that
aufgestellte Teams.
international
Und
teams
damit bin
would
ich beim zweiten
provide
Teil
better
des
research
Vortrages,
and not
bei der
diverse
Frage,
teams.
wie
That
es denn
brings us to the
eigentlich
second
nochmal
part of
war
my
mit der
presentation. So
Internationalisierung,
what
die manchmal
was
etwas untergeht, wenn wir nur über Diversität sprechen. Wie hängen
internationalization
eigentlich
about?
Diversität und Internationalisierung
How are
zusammen und kann man hier
internationalization and
überhaupt eine
diversity linked to
trennscharfe
each other?
Linie ziehen?
Can you actually
Ich mache den
distinguish
zweiten Teil
them
kürzer,
between
weil ich
them?
jetzt ja auch in dem
I
Kontext hier davon
am
ausgehe, nicht erst erklären zu müssen, was es mit
assuming that I don't
Internationalisierung
need
auf
to
sich hat.
explain what
In a nutshell
internationalization is about.
kann man
In a
sagen, die
nutshell,
Relevanz
we
von
can say the relevance
Internationalität
of
und Austausch ist in
internationality
der
and
Wissenschaft schon immer
international
unumstritten
exchange
gewesen.
has
In der zweiten
never
Hälfte
been
des
debated
20.
in
Jahrhunderts
science.
war
In the
die
second half of
Etablierung
the
von
20th
akademischen
century, the
Auslandsämtern
establishment
bzw.
of
International Offices
international offices
selbstverständliche
at
Aufgabe von
universities
Universitätsverwaltung.
was
Das aber
quite
heißt,
natural in
Internationalisierung bedeutete
international
immer schon, auch wenn das früher nicht so direkt
university
formuliert wurde, die
administration. So
Einführung
this
von
has
Diversität
always
in die
meant
Universität.
that
Darauf hatte auch Kai Six
diversity
vorher schon
was
aufmerksam gemacht.
introduced at universities. Kai
Internationalisierung,
Sixt
Diversität
also
sind also
mentioned that.
zwei
So
Werte, die beide die Lehre, die
internationalization and
Forschung und
diversity
auch
are two
Hochschulpolitik
values
prägen,
that
die aber
are
verhalten sie sich
shaping
zueinander? Sind es einfach
university
zwei Seiten
politics.
derselben
But
Medaille
what do they
oder
mean?
handelt
Are
es
they
sich
the
auch
same
so
side of
etwas wie
of a medal,
konkurrierende
or
Werte?
are they
Wie
concurrent,
gesagt, bei diesem
competing
Paper könnte man
values?
sagen, man
So
könnte sagen,
regarding this
der
paper, we
Erfolg
could
liegt an
say,
der
well, the
Diversität oder der
success
Erfolg liegt
is
an der
the diversity or
Internationalisierung.
the
Also wem schreiben wir
internationalization.
jetzt eigentlich
So
diesen positiven
to
Effekt
which
zu?
part do we allocate
Wenn wir
this positive
jetzt
effect?
dem
So
vorgeschlagenen Schema dreier Ebenen folgend erstmal die
when we
diskursive
follow
Ebene
the
ins Auge fassen,
structure of the
dann sehen
three
wir zwei
levels and we
globale
take the
Imperative, die
discursive
das
level, we
Schulsystem
have
der
two
Weltgesellschaft geprägt
imperatives
haben
here
und
that
noch
have
weiter
shaped
prägen.
the higher
Betrachtet man die
educational
beiden Diskurse,
landscape.
dann ist
So if you take a
offensichtlich,
look
dass
at
die
the
etwas
two
miteinander zu
discourses,
tun haben, aber
you
wie
can see
viel?
that they are
Wie eng
somehow
rücken die
related, but to what
zusammen?
extent,
Wie
how
sehr
closely are they
sind
intertwined?
Internationalisierung
How
und Diversität nur
strongly
verschiedene
are
Perspektiven auf
internationalization and
kerntägliche Fragen? Und
diversity
wenn es
just
letztlich um
different
dasselbe geht, was ist
perspectives
dann der
talking about
gemeinsame
the same
Nenner? Ich habe
core?
hier
And if this is the
Fragezeichen
case, what
reingeschrieben,
is
weil ich
this
diese Frage auch nicht einfach so
overlapping
beantworten
piece?
kann.
I have put question marks
Wie
in
sieht
here
es nun
because I
aus,
don't have
wenn
a
wir
simple
nicht
answer.
die
What does it
diskursive
look
Ebene,
like
jetzt
if
komme ich
we
auf die Ebene
don't
der
take a
Strategie,
discursive
sondern
level?
die Ebene konkreter
That brings me to the
Programme
strategy.
und
But if we take a
organisationaler
look at the
Einheiten
concrete
betrachten?
programs and
Hier kann man,
organizational
und das ist ganz
units,
interessant, eine
it is
historisch
quite
bedingte
interesting to
Trennung
see that
feststellen.
here you can see
In den
a
Verwaltungen
historic distinction.
wurde
In the
zunächst die International Offices
administrations,
etabliert und in der
the
jüngeren
international
Vergangenheit kamen
offices
weitere
were
Einheiten
established,
dazu.
and in the
Diese haben
recent
in
past,
Deutschland noch keinen
new offices
einheitlichen
were
Namen, aber wir
opened.
können
In
in den
Germany, we
USA,
don't have
teilweise
a
auch in
unified
Großbritannien, die
name, but
Tendenz
from the
beobachten,
US and the
breit
UK, we can
aufgestellte
see there is a
Offices for
tendency.
Diversity,
There are
Equity and Inclusion aufzubauen.
offices for diversity,
Einfachheit halber
equity,
würde
and
ich jetzt mal
inclusion
von
being
Diversity
established.
Offices
I
sprechen, so
am
parallel zu den
talking about
International Offices,
diversity
aber worauf ich
offices to
hinaus
make it
will, ist,
simple.
dass die
But what I want to
neben
say
die
here is
International Offices
that they
gestellt
are
wurden
put
und dass eben nicht
alongside the
systematisch
international
zusammengedacht wurde.
offices, and
Betrachtet man
they
sich
were
nun die
not
Aufgaben,
combined. So if
die
we
solche
take a look at
Verwaltungseinheiten übernehmen,
those
dann kann man
administrative
unterschiedliche Formen
units,
der
we
Arbeitsteilung,
can see
des
the
aneinander
different way
vorbeiarbeitens
of
und natürlich auch der
splitting the work.
Kooperation
You can
beobachten. Das sieht am Ende
seek
in
some
jeder
cooperation,
Universität anders aus.
and
Und
it
damit sind
looks
wir wieder
different
bei
at
der
every university. And
Diversitätspraktik,
that
also wie das
brings us
on
to
the
the
ground
diversity
aussieht, kann man
discourses so we can't
Ich
really
möchte
see
hier
what
nur
it
auf
looks
eine
like on the
interessante
ground.
Beobachtung aufmerksam
Let
machen.
me talk
Es
about
scheint
one
eine Art
interesting point
Tradition
here.
zu
There
geben,
seems to be some kind of
der
tradition
zufolge Universitäten
according to which
Diversität primär mit
universities
benachteiligten Gruppen
are
assoziieren, während Internationalisierung wiederum aus historischen Gründen
associating with
eher im Sinne einer
disadvantaged groups. So
Horizonterweiterung und damit
this
im Sinne
is a
des
broadening of a
Potenzials einer
horizon
höheren
and a
epistemischen
better
Diversität gedacht wird.
potential
Kurz, darauf
when
hat
we have
Lauren
more
Chow kürzlich
diversity.
in einem Aufsatz über
Lauren Chow
multikulturelle
had
Hochschulbildung
a
aufmerksam gemacht. Ich habe
paper
das hier
on
aufgeschrieben.
international and
Internationalisierung ist
multicultural higher
tendenziell mit
education.
Assets verknüpft, Diversity eher
Internationalization
mit
is associated
Deficits.
with
Ich
assets
vermute jetzt aber,
and
dass viele
diversity
hier im
with
Publikum
deficits.
sofort
I assume
protestieren
that
möchten bei dieser
many of
Sortierung.
you
Und
in
ich
the
will auch
audience
keineswegs
would
sagen, dass das eine sinnvolle
protest.
Arbeitsteilung
Well,
ist.
I don't
Es
think it
könnte aber
makes
sein,
sense to
dass
make
in
this
den
distinction,
Universitätsverwaltungen und
but
Leitungen
maybe in
solche
the
unterbewussten
university
Deutungsmuster nutzen.
administrations and management, they have
Um die
this way
Form
of
der
thinking.
Institutionalisierung dieser beiden
The
Imperative etwas
institutionalization
anschaulicher zu machen, habe ich hier zwei sehr
um,
unterschiedliche Universitäten
But to
rausgesucht. Und
show
damit
what this
nähere ich mich auch dem
imperative
Ende
looks
schon
like, I have
bald
brought
durch
along
die
two examples, and this
28
brings me
Minuten
closer to the end
durch.
of my presentation.
Insofern nur
I'm
noch
almost
Stichworte.
done. So
Hier
just
University
very
of
briefly
Michigan, ein
here, the
Extremfall, der
University
sich
of
dadurch
Michigan, an
auszeichnet, dass
extreme case.
2016
In
ein 65
2016,
Millionen Diversity-Plan, 85 Milliarden Dollar für einen
$85
5 Jahre
million
Diversity-Plan bereitgestellt
5-year
wurde und ein
diversity plan was made
umfassendes Office for
available in
Diversity, Equity and
2016,
Inclusion gegründet
and
wurde,
an
an dem
office for
ungefähr 60
diversity, equity, and
Leute
inclusion was
eingestellt
founded,
wurden.
and some
Dieses
60
Office for
people were
Diversity war
hired.
also ungefähr doppelt
This
so
office
groß
for
wie das
diversity
viel
was
traditionellere, in
twice
den
as
30er
big
Jahren
as the
gegründete
traditional
International Center.
international center,
Das habe
which
ich dann
was
mal verglichen mit
founded
der
in the
Universität of Bonn,
1930s. I compared that
wo
with the
man
University of
sagen kann,
Bonn.
auch hier das Dezernat
And we said,
Internationales
okay,
existiert seit
there is
1950
a
und
division
40
for
bis 50
international
Mitarbeiterinnen aktuell.
matters, and
Und dann
they
ist es
have
interessant,
between
dass man
40
jetzt
and
parallel
50
beobachten kann, wie in den
employees
letzten
working there.
Jahren
And
immer mehr
in the
Einrichtungen mit
past a few years,
Diversitätsbezug
there have been more and
gegründet
more
werden. Gleichstellungsbüro,
departments.
Familienbüro, Schwerbehindertenvertretung, die hatte man schon länger.
We
Neu
had
hinzu kam die
equal
Stabsstelle für
opportunities
Diversität,
offices,
das
we had a
Buchrektorat
family office, we had
Diversitätswissenzentrum für
an office
Diversitätsforschung der
for
Lehre.
people
Das
with
ist aber
severe
fragmentierter
disabilities, we had
als
one for
ein
diversity,
zusammenhängendes
we had
Office, wie wir es, sage ich
another
mal, in
one for
anderen
diversity.
Extremen an der
So this is
University of
more
Michigan sehen. Und das soll also nur ein
differentiated, not
Beispiel
as
dafür sein, wie
combined as
solche
at the
Strukturen
University of Michigan. And this
evolutionär
shows
entstehen und wie man
how
im Prinzip
those
momentan in
structures
Echtzeit
are
beobachten kann,
being
wie sich da
evolved,
neue
and in real
Strukturen an
time you
verschiedenen
can
Universitäten
now observe
herausbilden.
how
Ich
these
hätte
structures
jetzt
are built
hierzu
at universities.
noch systematischere Forschung aus einem
Well,
eigenen
I have
Projekt,
more
wo wir
systematic
versucht haben,
research from a
für
project
deutsche
that
und
we
polnische
carried out
Universitäten
in
die
German and
Struktur
Polish
dieser
universities to show the
Universitätsverwaltungen und
structure
der
of
zuständigen
this
Einheiten auch
administration of
quantitativ so
universities
zu
to
sortieren.
provide
Ich lasse
some
das hier aus
quantitative
Zeitgründen aus.
information.
Es
But
gab
for
gestern
reasons of
dazu
time,
auch
I'm
einen
not going
Workshop von
to
der Katharina
talk
Schmidt und der
about that.
Laila Riedlinger. Das
Katharina
haben vielleicht
Schmidt and
einzelne
Laila
von Ihnen
Riedlinger
also schon
had a workshop
mitgekriegt.
about
Ich
this
komme damit
yesterday.
aber zum Fazit.
But now I would like to go
Und will
to
noch
my
einmal auf
summary
das Verhältnis
directly.
von
Once
Diskursen,
again, I would
Praktiken
like to
und
talk about
Strategien
discourses,
eingehen.
practices, and
Auf der
strategies
diskursiven
again.
Ebene
At the
haben der
discourse level,
Diversitätsimperativ und der
the diversity
Internationalisierungsimperativ eine je
imperative and the
eigene Geschichte.
internationalization imperative
Gemeinsam
have
ist
a
beiden, dass sie
separate
die
history.
Universitäten
They have
unter Druck
something in
gesetzt
common.
haben,
They
beziehungsweise unter
put
Druck setzen,
universities under
nachzuweisen,
pressure
dass
in
sie dem
order
mit
to
Diversität
prove that
und
they are
Internationalisierung
dealing
verknüpften
with
gesellschaftlichen
diversity
Anforderungen
and
Genüge tun.
internationalization and that they
Erwartet
meet
wird, dass
the
die hinter dem
society's demands. The
Diversitätsimperativ
expectation is that
ebenso wie
behind
die
the
hinter dem
diversity
Internationalisierungsimperativ
imperative as
stehenden
well
Werte
as
in
the
der Organisationsstruktur
international
verankert werden und nach außen
imperative,
ein
there are
entsprechendes
values, that
Commitment
these
kommuniziert wird.
values are
Die übliche
established and
Antwort der
communicated
Universitäten
abroad
auf diese
and
wirkmächtigen
outside.
Diskurse sind
And the
entsprechende Strategien.
universities' replies are
Diversitätsstrategien oder
certain strategies, diversity
Internationalisierungsstrategien, wie man in
strategies
jedem
or
Gesetz einen Paragraph
internationalization
reinschreibt.
strategies
Und diese
that
Strategien
are
sollen, so die Idee, die
established,
Praktiken
and
verändern.
these strategies
Aber
are
die
supposed to
Praktiken
change
bleiben oft eine
practice.
Blackbox.
However,
So
the
genau
practice
wissen wir
is a
nicht,
black
wie wir
box. We don't
eigentlich im
really know
Alltag
how we
Lehre und
act
Forschung in
in
Diversität und
everyday
Internationalität
research and
umgehen.
development,
Wie
and how we deal
kommunizieren und
with
kooperieren wir mit
internationalization and
diversen oder
diversity. How do
internationalen
we
Strukturen?
communicate?
Welche
How do we
Rolle
cooperate
spielt
with
der diverse
international
Hintergrund
levels?
bei
And
verschiedenen
what
Kooperationspartnern in der
role does
Forschung?
the
Solche
diverse
Fragen werden
background
in den
play in international
Strategiepapieren natürlich
cooperation?
nicht
These
beantwortet, weil wir
questions
im
are
Prinzip
not
die Daten
answered in
dazu
the
gar nicht
papers
haben.
because we don't have the
Wahrscheinlich ist es eine gute Nachricht,
necessary
dass die
data.
Praxis
It is
immer auch ihr
probably
Eigenleben führt.
good. It's good news to know that practice is doing quite well, and maybe they are far ahead of the strategies. So I would like to draw the conclusion. In practice, internationalization and diversity are much more closely linked than is reflected in the formal structures of the universities and represented by the players. Thank you very much for your attention.
Vielen Dank an Herrn Kaldewey. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Mr. Kaldewey.
Und mit Blick auf die Uhrzeit
And I'm taking a look at the clock now. So we have a lot of questions, and we will use them for the panel discussion. So we will include them in the panel discussion because we would like to continue and stick to the timetable. Thank you, Dr. Kaldewey. He's the director for international studies of the University of Bonn. Thank you very much for your explanations and all the buzzwords